And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I'm excited to be with you today. Today we are jumping into the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, known as the era of Jefferson. So he's going to serve for 8 years. He's going to take out Adams, who is running for his second term. Adams will lose pretty handily, actually, because federalism is not popular due to things such as the Alien and Sedition Acts. So that's going to lead the way for the Democratic Republican Party to come in, and Jefferson is going to have 8 years to do a lot of things that he sees fit. And so let us begin. So, I already mentioned the Alien Sedition Acts. I mentioned the Federalist parties. This is really the first election where there are two main parties going on. You're going to see both parties are going to support tariffs. The Northerners wanted higher tariffs to protect their company from foreign competition, while the Southerners wanted lower tariffs to encourage trade. We have Adams who gonna lose that election, and then Aaron Burr is going to become Jefferson's vice president. There's gonna be a tie between the two, and Congress is gonna choose between Thomas Jefferson, and that's gonna lead the way for Jefferson to come in and do what he's always wanted to do, which it's obvious he wanted to be president for a long time here. So. All right, so Jefferson's presidency, hoping to gain the trust of the Federalists, he's going to keep the national bank. He's also going to continue the whole debt plan by Hamilton that he proposed under Washington. You're going to see the neutrality policies for foreign affairs that Washington aspired to. Jefferson's going to try to keep that same stance as a country. He stayed true to the principles of his party regarding limited government. He's going to reduce the size of the military. Adams increased it. He's going to reduce it. Eliminate a number of federal jobs. He's going to repeal excise taxes, such as those on whiskey. He's going to lower the national debt. He appointed only Democratic Republicans to his cabinet, seeking to avoid the internal conflict that Washington and Adams dealt with during their presidencies. Compared to Adams' troubled administration, Jefferson's first years in office were relatively free of discord. So we have something that's about to happen, which is probably one of the most significant things to happen in American history, which is the Louisiana Purchase. So if you remember back in our many times going back and forth with the history of America in units 2 and 3, um, the Louisiana Territory was once claimed by France. And then after the 7 Years' War, they lost it, and Spain took that territory. Now, Louisiana Territory is the territory that is west of the Mississippi River. However, in 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte's going to secretly force Spain to give the territory back to France. So Napoleon has this aspirations of resurrecting, if you will, the French Empire in the Americas. Um, and so he has the Louisiana Purchase back in the hands of the French. However, things are going to change by 1803. Number one, he's going to start realizing he wants to concentrate all his resources in conquering Europe, and that means Great Britain, their greatest rival. And also, they're going to lose in Santo Domingo, which is modern day Haiti, something known as the Haitian Revolution. They're going to lose it. The Haitian slaves are going to fight back, and it's going to cause Napoleon to say, you know what, forget the Americas. It's a pipe dream. Let's just focus on Europe. So what that means is, you have an opportunity here, especially as Americans, to be able to take advantage of this new thinking of Napoleon. So by 1802, Spain had violated the Pinckney Treaty of 1795 because French persuasion by closing the ports to Americans. So remember, the main port that opens up, and if you control this port, you control pretty much the Mississippi, is New Orleans. So again, you have the Picnic Treaty that's being violated, even though the French are kind of pressuring Spanish to do so. But anyway, that's going to change things. Jefferson realizes, look, we have to own the Mississippi River. We need to have control. If not, we're going to be entangled by European affairs, until this changes. So Jefferson's going to send people over to France and say, look, 10 million for New Orleans, and a set amount of land that spans throughout the Mississippi. And then Napoleon and his people are going to counter and say, actually, why don't we just give you 15 million for the whole of the Louisiana Purchase? So if you don't know what the Louisiana Purchase is, it's pretty much all the green area here. And Jefferson's diplomats who go to negotiate don't even reach out to Jefferson about this new change, because this was a once in a lifetime opportunity here. They're willing to pay 10 million for New Orleans and a bit of the Mississippi. And now they get, not only that, they get everything, all of it, for 5 million more, which anyway. So they went ahead with the deal. Jefferson loved it. The problem is he believes in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And there's no clause in the Constitution that says the president can purchase foreign lands. However, Jefferson followed Hamilton's approach, believing that just because the Constitution does not expressly say it, certain powers should be implied. And of course, Jefferson was called a hypocrite by the Federalist Party because he'd been screaming and yelling at Adams and people like Hamilton, who basically were doing the same thing that he now did. But nevertheless, the Louisiana Purchase was complete. It's in American hands for 15 million. Where the consequences here, it's gonna more than double the size of the United States of America. It's gonna remove a European presence from the nation's borders. Okay? We're going to extend the western frontier past the Mississippi River with more land. Jefferson's agrarian vision for Americans was more attainable than that of Hamilton's urban vision. I understand the two people. Jefferson's idea of a perfect America is everybody has their own plot of land, has, remember, John Locke, believed that, life, liberty, and property, right? So Jefferson liked the idea that everybody had property, had something that they could call their own, that they could work the land themselves, that they could be self-sufficient in case there was some kind of a economic downturn or anything like that. He wanted Americans to have their own land and have a farm ability to farm and to take care of their family, etc. Hamilton, however, looked at it more as Britain, where it would be this highly concentrated urban centers where people could have thriving economy and capitalism, etc. So that's kind of the two visions they have, and they're pretty opposite in many respects. Now, the purchase increased Jefferson's popularity and weakened the Federalist Party. So Jefferson's going to send out two people known as Lewis and Clark, Captain Meriwether Lewis, and you have Lieutenant William Clark, and they're going to go do their famous exploration of the Louisiana Purchase and into also the Oregon Territory. So you have, the benefits of this is you're going to get greater scientific knowledge of the region. That's now America for the most part. You're going to have stronger U.S. claims to Oregon Territory. You have a better relations with American Indians and more accurate maps and land routes for trade and settling for the future. Now, Aaron Burr, he is not going to become Jefferson's vice president the second term, and mainly because Jefferson doesn't want him, and neither does the Democratic Republican Party. So Burr is a bit of an vindictive man. When he doesn't get chosen for this, he does take it very personally, and he conspires what's called the Federalist conspiracy. So Burr and a group of radical New England Federalists, so he kind of jumped ship from anti-Federalist to Federalist, planned to have Burr win the governorship of New York in 1804, unite the state with the New England states, and then lead this group of states to secede from the Union. Alexander Hamilton opposed Burr, who was defeated in the New York election, ending any chance of this plan to succeed. So he doesn't get the election of being the governor of New York, and that kind of tanks the whole conspiracy that they created. Um, However, Alexander Hamilton is going to be a large opponent of Burr, especially if they're figuring out that he's planning something. So he's going to say some personal things to attack Burr. Burr's going to challenge him, and they're going to duel. And the famous duel will be Burr shoots and kills Aaron Alexander Hamilton. So after that happens, there's a trial for treason that Jefferson tries to bring up to Burr because he has yet another plan. Burr's next plan was to conquer Mexico and unite all of the Louisiana territory. Jefferson considered Burr's plan to be treasonous and had him arrested. The presiding Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, was a longtime adversary of Jefferson. A jury acquitted Burr, basing its decision on Marshall's narrow definition of treason and the lack of witnesses to any overt act by Burr. So Burr escapes treason. However, that ushers in the era of John Marshall. John Marshall is going to be the chief U.S. Supreme Court judge, and he and Jefferson don't get along. John Marshall likes federal government. He is a Federalist, and his decisions will be to increase federal power. So we're going to talk about a few of these things here, right? So we have Marbury versus Madison, Martin versus Hunter's Lease, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, McCulloch versus Maryland, Cohen's versus Virginia, and Gibbons versus Ogden. We're going to talk about each of these. So, Marbury versus Madison's probably the most significant one. What happened was when John Adams was on his way out when he didn't get reelected, he did what's called some midnight appointments, and he put some Federalist judges in some lower level courts. And that didn't go so well with Jefferson. So Jefferson sought to block these judges because he didn't like them, for one thing. They were Federalists, and he felt like that was, if their commission wasn't delivered to where they needed to be by the time Adams was still president, then he didn't feel like he needed to honor that. So there's going to be a lawsuit. William Marbury is going to sue for his commission, and the case eventually made up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Remember, Marbury is one of those lower court judges here. So Marshall um, ruled against Marbury his commission, citing that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. I want you to understand, Marbury and Marshall are Federalists, and Marshall, instead of having a small victory and putting in a Federalist judge that Adams wanted, Marshall did something different. He said no, you couldn't, and then that set a precedent for the doctrine of judicial review, meaning that any time from that point on, the Supreme Court could exercise the power to decide whether an act of Congress or the president was allowed by the Constitution. So at this point, now you have the Supreme Court that can basically look at any act and say, okay, is that constitutional by Congress or president? Whereas before that wasn't the precedent. You also have Fletcher versus Peck. This is a case involving land fraud in Georgia. Marshall concluded that a state could not pass legislation invalidating a contract. So, this was the first time that the Supreme Court declared a state law to be unconstitutional, arguing that a contract for a private corporation could not be altered by the state. So, remember that again, here we have this is Marshall's going to choose federal power over state power. Martin and Hunter's Lease, you have the Supreme Court established that it had jurisdiction over state courts in cases involving constitutional rights. So if there's a case where someone's rights are claimed to be constitutional rights have been violated, then the U.S. Supreme Court will have jurisdiction over that than the state courts itself. Dartmouth College versus Woodward, here's another case in which you have the law of New Hampshire changes Dartmouth College from a privately owned charter college into a public institution. And Dartmouth wasn't quite okay with that, and the Marshall Court struck down the state law as unconstitutional, arguing that a contract for a private corporation could not be altered by the state. So we have McCulloch versus Maryland. Maryland attempted to tax the second bank of the United States, which was located in Maryland. Marshall ruled that a state could not tax a federal institution because the power to tax is the power to destroy. They ruled that federal laws are supreme over state laws. Also, using a loose interpretation of the Constitution, Marshall ruled that even though no clause in the Constitution specifically mentions a national bank, the Constitution gave federal government the implied powers to create one. So again, and by the way, this is a famous saying now going forward, is the power to tax is the power to destroy. So keep that in mind. Cohen's and versus Virginia established the principle that the Supreme Court could review a state court's decision involving any of the powers of the federal government. Gibbons versus Ogden, Marshall established the federal government's broad control over interstate commerce. So slowly you can see Marshall is increasing federal power by his decisions, and those decisions are favoring the federal government. After Jefferson is done with his 8 years, Madison is going to run and he's going to become president. Now, Madison, for some reason in APUSH, kind of gets a shaft here because we don't really talk much about him, unfortunately. He will be president during the War of 1812, and he will be president for 2 terms. But other than the War of 1812, there's really not a whole lot that the curriculum really says about him. But anyway, go ahead and write your summary, and we'll discuss this when we return.